It's my song. Called Grace, you all. Welcome to the Alchemy series. We're talking about everything. We're really talking about tools for transformation with marriage and family therapist, Miss Dinna Alexanyan. And before we jump into this whole conversation about how to transmute your life, I'm going to introduce you guys to some other conversations that we're having this week. We've got Auntie J, who will be here on Wednesday. She's a part of our Alchemy series as well. Auntie J, she is talking about mirroring your vision. We're very excited to have her. We also have me starting a live music series on Saturday, every Saturday at 8 o'clock p.m. So make sure that you guys tune in for that as well. It is my honor, it is my pleasure, it is my joy to introduce you guys to Dinna Alexanyan. The conversation last week, if you are looking for it, you can find it on thefunmanifesto.com so that you can be up to date with our talking. But we're going to talk just a little bit about that as we begin anyhow. So let us get started, get cooking. Miss Dinna Machina. How you doing?
What happened to the song? I was popping and locking down here.
We'll come back to it. How you doing, girl?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for part 2. And I want to say that if you missed part 1, please go back and listen to it so that this can feel like it's flowing and makes a little bit more sense to you. So,
absolutely.
Should we launch in?
We should launch in. So for those few who did not see last week, why don't you give us just a brief overview of what we did talk about last week?
We talked about the basics of what happens to the brain during trauma, the different chemicals and neurotransmitters. And then we associated the different meridian energy points called chakras in your body to different developmental ages and what happens in those different chakras when you have trauma during those ages and how you have to clear out from the bottom up to get here and here and here and up in here and in your most eloquent and beautiful form of joy. So please do go back and watch that so you guys can understand where we're going now.
It was super powerful. I can't tell you how many people have messaged me and been like, wow, I had never looked at it like that. So it was really, really powerful. Thank you so much for that.
So something we touched on last week was adrenal burnout, which is what I want to talk about right now. So adrenal burnout, your adrenals sit around your kidney, and then the adrenals are like a little baseball cap on top of the kidney in a sense. And if you're releasing the hormone cortisol, which is the stress hormone, the fight or flight hormone, if you're over releasing it like too many times throughout the day, then you start to get adrenal burnout. And if it gets really bad, then you could have what's called adrenal fatigue, which is kind of like what you hear about when touring artists faint on stage or whatever it might be, right? So it's basically a massive amount of stress all the time pushing through. And last week I talked about how you're like a rubber band and your adrenals, you pull the rubber band. If you keep pulling it and pulling it and pulling it, when you snap it back, like you've relaxed for the day, the rubber band doesn't go back to its original shape. It's all messy, right? So I want to say that there's a couple of different ways, and I'm not going to go into too much detail around this, but there's a couple of different ways that people can get tested for adrenal burnout. One is like a saliva test. Another one that I really do want to focus a little bit about is your gut, the bacteria in your gut, the good bacteria, and why this is super, super, super important, and it ties into diet, which I'll touch on a little bit as well, is because the main neurotransmitter that we are trying to produce more of in order to calm down, which is what the adrenal burnout is doing to us, it's making us like feel like, oh, is serotonin. And about 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut, okay? And what you eat, specifically protein, can transfer right into serotonin. Okay? So For instance, one of the things people talk about doing to kind of regulate your blood sugar and your cortisol and help you sleep a little bit better is to have some organic turkey with some coconut oil right before you go to sleep. The tryptophan from the turkey helps translates into serotonin, helps you relax. I don't know if you ever heard about, like, after Thanksgiving, people get the itis, and so that's the tryptophan. And combined with the good fat of the coconut oil, all kind of mixes together and becomes like a nicer level of serotonin, right? So your gut, saliva testing is another, and the other one is just different foods that you're trying to eat, okay? And some omegas, fatty fish oils, like things like that. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But what I do want to say about this is that you can reset your adrenals chemically, okay? We'll talk about what you can do in your life to reset them. But one of the things is a sort of like a 90-day diet of sorts, okay? And a routine. So we'll get to that. So in psychology, they talk a lot about 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. Okay. This is an adjustment period. The hardest time to adjust to something is the first 3 days. After about 3 weeks, and people talk about like quitting smoking or something, after about 3 weeks, you start to adjust a little bit. And after 3 months, you actually have changed your programming completely so that whatever you were doing before is not a routine for you anymore. It's not an addiction. And now what you've put into place for 3 months is, right? So one of the things is meditation. Okay. Box breathing, which is something you've done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Breathing in for 5 breaths, holding it for 5 breaths, exhaling for 5 breaths, holding it for 5 breaths, breathing it, and keep doing that. That's box breathing. Mm-hmm. That meditation, that synchronicity, that slowing down of the breath, combined with yoga, all right? Yoga being a wonderful routine, not just because it's hip and happening right now, but specifically because it forces you to breathe very, very deeply. Mm-hmm. Okay? Getting outside, having exercise. Vitamin D holds, like, I think up to something like 200 genetic transmissions. So vitamin D is super, super important. Vitamin B is super important. So these are things people can talk to about with their nutritionalists. I don't want to personally go too much into it. But understand that a 90-day sort of reboot of your routine in terms of what you're eating and ingesting is super, super important. So
powerful. We talked about, so I'm hearing, are you guys hearing a delay or an echo? Someone wrote that I'm louder than you and that there's an echo when I talk. So I was hearing it for a moment, but I don't hear it any longer. Okay. I think we're okay.
I don't hear it, but I did hear before that maybe I need to talk a little bit louder.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's something that Dr. Beckwith calls the blisscipline, the bliss discipline. And I said, well, I think that the blisscipline is meditation, mantra, movement, and medicine. And it sounds like but that's, after millions of conversations with you and Auntie J, like, what are the things that kind of line up to help you to have your best life and routine? But it sounds like even just the process of creating that and so forth, this 90-day reset is that those things fall into that as well.
Oh, yeah? Absolutely. And when you say medicine, it really is food.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
what you're putting into your body, that's super, super important. So, so this is a great transition. So there was a documentary I was studying in terms of happiness, right? And they were talking about how 50% of your base sort of personality happiness has to do with genetics. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's just your base. So, and a lot of people freak out because they're like, but my mom is crazy. So that's 50%. And that's not exactly how genetics work. You have to think that you're getting 50% of your mother and 50% of your father. And sometimes you don't. You get like 75% of your mother and 25%. So some people escape all the mental illness and all the craziness. So don't get freaked out by that. But only 10% is circumstances. Okay. Meaning if you make 50,000 a year or you make 5 million a year, that actually doesn't change that much of your level of happiness. Of course, if you're homeless and you're not homeless, yes, it does. But only 10% is circumstance. That leaves a whole 40% of our brain that we can completely manipulate, right? So all the studies were like, what do we do to get dopamine? Okay, remember from last week, dopamine is like the happy chemical, right? How do we get dopamine, which starts to decline as soon as our teenage years? It's already leaving our brain and we don't get it back.
Right.
How do we get it from the outside world, right? Mm-hmm. So they did all these studies, done all this research, and they found that you could actually, like in doing CT scans and doing all this stuff in the brain, they realized that you could actually rebuild certain tissue in the brain, the happiness tissue. Mm-hmm. And it's very much like you use it or lose it, like in terms of exercise. Like if you don't build the muscle in your body, you're going to lose it, right? And this is the same thing. So the practices are, one is, okay, one thing that influences is having community, family, isolation. It's unfortunate because of what's happening right now, but isolation is really, really very challenging.
And these are components to growing a happy life.
Yes.
What you're saying. Okay, go ahead.
And this ties into the adrenal fatigue, okay? Because let me just go back a little bit. The adrenal fatigue, you want to know like some symptoms, okay?
Yeah.
Is like you feel that you can't handle any kind of stress or everything feels very overwhelming. So like if you get like 3 texts at a time, you're like, oh, I can't handle this, right?
Right.
It kind of feels like when you're hypoglycemic, like if you haven't eaten and you can't concentrate or focus, if you get like that, that's kind of what adrenal fatigue feels like all the time, right? Or adrenal
you also said something before where like, if you have adrenal fatigue, one way to also know that you do is because if you slow down long enough, you might discover that you're creating the drama in your life. So it's like you're keeping you're keeping the cortisol kicking out at the level that you've become accustomed to.
Absolutely. Or people who drink like 10 fucking shots of coffee just to be able to wake up. So major, like waking up, major fogginess, feeling like you're crashing in the middle of the day, getting like a second wind at night, not being able to sleep through the night, feeling like you might be having panic attacks throughout the day, feeling really like antsy or super exhausted, but so tired, but you can't sleep. You never feel rested. That kind of feeling, right? So community, so back to the other thing. So now if you have community, you have family, you have people supporting you. That's one thing that's going to help you with happiness. Doing outside activities, not just like outside, but like some kind of physical activities that are combined with silliness. So like running down the street dressed up as like some kind of animal costume with your friends or something, doing something silly like that will really bring a lot of like dopamine. But for a lot of people, that could be dance classes, whatever it is, right? Being in flow. Flow can be meditation. Flow can be gardening. Flow can be cooking, sailing, anything that sort of puts you in a slightly hypnotic state. So that's super important. And they found that the thing that increases it the most is specifically meditation that's loving kindness, compassion meditation, that particular meditation, and doing acts of kindness. Okay? So they talked about this island off of Japan where they had the most amount of women that were over 100 years old that were like the happiest people in the world kind of thing. And this was their routine. And you see how it all ties in. They would wake up in the morning. They would garden. So there's exercise, there's flow, right? They gather the food. They go to the community center where they have all their homies. They give each other the food. That's their act of kindness. They have family and community and support each other. Yes. So all of it tied in. And then they had like generations and generations of their family that were around them and all this stuff, right? So
culturally relevant.
Yeah. So when you're tying in the idea of why it's so important when you have trauma and when you have adrenal burnout to have a routine, it does give you a sense of control when you're feeling really out of control.
Yeah.
Celebrating simple things like, I get up at this time. Good job,
Mm.
right? I woke up and I went and did my like yoga and meditation. Good job. I go grocery shopping on Mondays. I do this. It's nice to have a little variation because you have to have a little dopamine excitement. Like maybe you take a run, but it's a different path, or maybe you go kayaking this one week or something like that, right? So you incorporate all these things. Going to sleep, this is if you have adrenal fatigue. Like not everybody has to do this, right? But going to sleep at the same time every night,
Mm.
to wake up at the same time every morning. That routine. Eating well, but also eating these 3 regular meals or whatever your meals are, to just be pretty regular about it.
Mm-hmm.
Having regular exercise, having a meditation routine,
Mm-hmm.
having, I really think, a yoga meditation routine.
So it sounds like consistency is the through line. Like what you have to do is to identify what the thing is that you can do regularly, that hits these markers where it's being in community, it's eating the foods that are going to balance your body, it's getting up and going to sleep at the same time, but that those it's not so much waking up at 7 o'clock specifically every morning, but just creating the consistency that you can live by.
Yeah.
Helps you to reset the adrenals. Like I noticed when I was doing the prayers every morning, for me, that the consistency of just waking up and saying these words to myself and to people and being of service and in community, even digitally.
You totally thought of this when you were doing that.
Huge change in my life. But what it did for me was it helped me to be calm enough so that I could hear really what I'm supposed to do next. Like I feel now that I'm relaxed enough that I can create another routine. Like it doesn't mean that it's going to evolve for sure, but that I'm also just calm enough that I can hear God be like, okay, now do this.
Yeah. And I think that when somebody is in major trauma, like in PTSD, the disassociative feelings and things like that, they can make you feel so out of control.
Yeah.
That it's nice to just have some things that you can count on that are like an autopilot.
Yeah.
Like it's just get up.
Yeah.
Okay, just walk to the door.
Right.
Take your yoga mat, walk
Right.
out the door, go
Right.
down there, do the yoga. Like you may not even remember that you did it because you were so disassociated, but there's something for the fact that you just kept this regular routine, and after a while it literally will regulate you in a sense.
So what I call that, for me, I talk about joy versus happiness, the idea that joy is the state of the divine nature that we really have, versus happiness. You're available to the happening of happiness, but it's hard to consistently be available to the happening of happiness with adrenal burnout. Like it's really potentially impossible to be available to the true happening of present happiness if you're not grounded and rooted. And then there's that much more happiness available for you the more consistently grounded and rooted you are.
Yes.
And
it's important. I forgot this one part. Gratitude journaling was a major one as well, because and next week we'll really embrace this, but thoughts do become things. And sometimes we're really married to being pissed off that day and sad that day. And we could look at it differently. We could just decide that we're just going to let it go and be happy. We could, But for people who are really chemically depressed, like the dopamine is not there, the serotonin's not there, then the gratitude journaling, even if I always say, like, fake it till you make it. Even if it just feels fake, eventually your body and your brain will catch up. And there'll be a moment where it'll just go click, and you'll feel a little bit of that chemical releasing, And I experienced that a lot where, like, I'm very addicted to, like, the next production, the next showcase, the next thing I want to create. And there's certain times where it's like not happening, and I'll be like, man. And I will literally just start to fantasize about the next thing I want to do. And I'll be like, oh, there it is. I can feel like the happiness coming in, the joy coming in, you know? So this actually leads to the next part, which is ritual practice and spirituality. Okay. Because I think what you're talking about, correct me, you know, but the joy is, it does feel a little bit ethereal, like spiritual in a sense, almost like your crown chakra opens to receive that in, right? And so when you were doing those morning prayers, you said you could hear clear what you were supposed to do. That's what we would call like being in alignment with your higher self. Okay. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this next week. But what I want to say about ritual practice and spirituality is that as a therapist, it is definitely much easier for me to work with clients that have some kind of connection to some type of spirituality. Because if real tragedy happens, like something that is just inexcusable, like your child passes away, it's, if you have no relationship to anything higher than yourself, it feels so meaningless that it's very, very challenging to work with people like that and to really try to help them come out of their depression. The spirituality gives you a sense of two things, right? A sense of meaning, like a purpose and meaning, like there's a bigger thing for me, or there's a purpose, but also in a sense, the idea of this higher self, even if you believe that God is the divine within yourself or is your higher self, it still feels like you're being cared for. Like there is a distinct difference between a person who walks through this world believing that as fucked up as shit is, I'm still ultimately being looked out for. That everything is gonna be somehow okay. Versus the person who walks through this world being like, nobody's really looking out for me. Not even my higher self isn't looking out for me. I don't believe that, like nothing. Right. And so everything's kind of out to get me. So I have to walk through this world ready to fight everything, you know? So ritual practice and spirituality, like there's this one article that talked about children that were child soldiers, right? And they did a study with a particular child that had been kidnapped, had been forced to murder a lot of people, and then came back over to his community. And they did a very extensive ritual practice, spiritual ritual practice, where the entire community came in and did these rituals, okay, which is routine ritual, right? The community came, and the community and the social forgiveness let this child forgive himself. So that community and family, and so that's really, really, really important. And as well as made him feel like he could forgive himself, forgive what had happened to him, that there was some bigger purpose in it. And that in actuality changes the brain more than just traditional psychotherapy. So if we could heal each other in that way, in a communal type of way, it would be extremely powerful for people who experience trauma on all types of levels, you know?
You know, what's really great too about, doing therapy, I always say, hurt people hurt people. Hurt people often hurt people the way that they've been hurt. They usually improve upon the pain that they've exacted upon folks, and they're often unaware of how much more they're hurting people. But it's also true that healed people heal people, and so like, I think the greatest thing that we can do for our communities and being available to create a society where folks can do exactly what you're talking about is for individuals to do this work, for individuals to be like, I matter enough. I know that I'm going to take care of me, and that if you can believe that in taking care of yourself, you're available to the idea that you're an answered prayer or you're a gift, however your spiritual thing works it out, then, we get a chance to come together in community in a way that's just way less judgmental, Like, I think that's one of the big problems, even with our political structures right now and so forth, is that there's so little room for forgiveness for ourselves that it's really difficult to forgive others,
Yeah.
And we want to create a world where we can come together and heal the wounds that are happening so that we can take the next step. And this, I'm again so happy that we're doing this in this time while the world is slowing down and kind of, remolding and so forth. And we get to tell our minds something else.
Yeah, it just made me think about just a funny thing where like I when I lived in up in the mountains in Oakland, the house was like really, really out in the mountains. And I used to have this fantasy that I would tell my girlfriends where I was like, we should do a thing where we literally kidnap like abused women and blindfold them and kidnap them and then they like come up for air and they're in a center of a circle and we surround them like a huge group of women and when we just yell positive things to them like
That
you're
would
beautiful,
potentially be a
you're
little
amazing,
abusing also.
oh, yeah, like an intense like ritual of just like positivity.
Yeah.
So they like literally build up and then they walk out that door with like a gang of other women behind them,
Knowing that
So
they're better.
anyway, side note.
Don't
be scared, man.
That idea sans the kidnapping part.
Yeah, but I say that. I mean, not. I know you're not being literal, and I'm not literal either. But like, I say that because women in that situation are hypnotized at that moment. They really cannot. Outside of kidnapping them, there's really no getting them out of there.
Yeah.
So, and that's just like I bring that up to say that in a sense is community and ritual. It's if we felt held together by a community of people that sat with us and said we forgive you and do rituals around it and make it a something bigger than ourselves, part of like something way bigger, then the healing that can happen in terms of adrenal fatigue and trauma and like all these things is much quicker and it's beautiful.
It's amazing, I think, again, because there's the opportunity for it right now because you're seeing how interconnected we really are. You know what I mean? If there's an outbreak in Brazil that's happening of this disease, travel is impacted, food supply is impacted. There's so many things that are impacted. And instead of villainizing the different pieces of the puzzle, we all get the opportunity to see where we're faulty. But we also get the opportunity to see where we're strong and where we get to show up for each other. I think that folks have been like, these are the end times. And I'm like, fucking right. Absolutely. They're the end times of oppression. They're the end times of this idea that we don't have everything that we need to thrive. And what we need most importantly is each other. So I'm really hopeful.
Which is ironic considering the social distancing and such, but yes.
Yeah.
So to bring it back to like each individual that's watching this.
Yes.
So we've talked about what happens in trauma to the brain. We talked about the chakras. We now talked about adrenal fatigue and the importance of routine and self-care. And in self-care, the ability to say no is a big one, which I still am working on. Carving out time for yourself, taking care of yourself, having a routine, rituals, spirituality, this and that, right? So now for next week, I want to give everybody their homework assignment. Just do what I say. Don't ask me any questions. That's my
grandmother coming out.
Yeah. Next week, I will explain to you guys how this works, what we're going to do with this, okay? And next week is super exciting because next week is like looking at your whole life, analyzing it, seeing the purpose of it, seeing why everything happened, grabbing it by the balls, and deciding what you're going to create for the rest of your life.
Woohoo!
So, to make it simple. So, what I would like you guys to do is if you have a journal or a piece of paper, like a computer paper, whatever, you take it and you draw a line horizontally across, okay? And you're going to put lines like this, like a ruler. You're going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and keep going all the way up until your present age, okay?
You may need
so that might be multiple papers. Not one paper per year, guys.
Shut up, Dana!
When I first did this with Jen, she was like, one! This is what happened! And then she like flipped it over. And then I was like, whoa, with papers. So multiple papers. It's probably going to be like, if people are in average listening to this, like late 30s into their 40s, then it's probably going to be like 5 of these papers, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And for every age, I would like you to put anything that you remember significant that happened in your life, good or bad. Okay? And there might be some years that you're like, whatever, nothing.
You'll remember.
And there might be some years that it's like a whole, paragraph. And I would like you to take those papers and just keep them together. Should I tell you guys to do this? Yeah. So when you're done with it, tape them together so they end up becoming one long one. And then just roll it up and put it away. You don't got to look at it. You don't have to figure out, what is Dinna going to do with this? That's my job. That's my job. So just do this.
Yes.
And I don't know if there's any questions. Do you think it's clear?
I think it's clear.
Horizontal line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to your present age. Oh, I'm sorry. And then also go a little past your present age, maybe like 10 years past.
Okay.
So if you're 45, go 46, 47, 48, 49 to 55.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you all have any questions, please drop them in the comments now for these last few moments. There was a question that Chameleon was asking about. She said, I use L-tryptophan pills. Yeah. Not the same as the serotonin? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
They're not, those are not serotonin pills, but they're just the tryptophan. They're the extract of what the neurotransmitters that's coming from, or the chemicals that are coming from the turkey.
Awesome. So to recap what we discussed today, we talked about adrenal burnout, and we talked about how we can identify adrenal burnout. We said that folks may be overly tired or overly hyper, little manic, and that there are ways to get tested for it. We talked about that a little bit. We also talked about the importance of creating consistency and a routine in your life to reset your neural pathways or to reset your adrenals, right? And now we're talking about what happens next in your life. I'm excited.
There's also, because it's not extremely legal for me to talk about nutrition and vitamins and things like that, because it's out of my scope of practice. I'm not a licensed nutritionalist and stuff. But I'm sure that you guys could figure it out. There's magnesium is really great. Zinc is really great. There's all these things that are really great. And the packet that everybody's going to have access to after this workshop is over lists a lot of these things as well.
Awesome.
And all the things you could do for yourself, they call them low, moderate, and extreme self-care things. From taking a bath to taking yourself to Brazil. Oh, and I did want to add that too. Travel is really good for people, because seeing something different just brightens up your, releases some dopamine and stuff. But when you have adrenal fatigue or when you're in PTSD, sometimes the change of routine can be very shake you up in not so great ways. So you got to find the balance of getting the routine, resetting your adrenals, and then changing the world and going traveling.
Well, Dinna, Machina, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Thank you for all of your wisdom and your good energy. Like I say always, if you have questions for Miss Dinna, you can ask Miss Dinna on thefunmanifesto.com. If you have not yet created a profile, definitely go and do that for yourself. And Fun Manifesto is a place for people to share their wisdom and their love and their light with each other. So we're not talking politics. We're not talking no drama, none of that. It is a place sans the algorithm and the bullshit of Facebook. You can be social with people who are there to inspire you towards remembering who you are and how awesome you really are. And we hope that you share how awesome you are with other people, because You never know who's watching and how they may be inspired by your story. Dinna has something to say.
I was just saying, and please come back next week because it's so fun what we do.
Yeah.
It's so empowering, and I know you're gonna feel. I know everybody's excited to get to like the joy part.
Yeah. You know, and because I've done it, I can speak to that. Like, just do what she said. Just do what she said, because in the coming days and when we sit down and we work with Auntie J this coming week, you're going to have some homework that's going to fit right on into it. And so, again, if you have not listened to Dinna, the first interview with Dinna, or haven't heard the first interview with Auntie J, do yourself a favor. There's a reason that we've paired them together to talk. And this is for you. This is an investment that you're making in yourself. So I'm really, really excited for you all. So just a couple of reminders and announcements. We've got Auntie J on Wednesday, and she is doing her Mirroring Your Vision. We're in part 2 of the 3-part series, and you can grab her book, Mirroring Your Vision, for 99 cents on Amazon to download. You can also download the physical copy, which I definitely recommend since you write inside the book. And then also on Saturdays, starting this coming Saturday, I'm starting my own little alchemy session with live music. And I can't wait to share with you guys what I've evolved with this music. So tune in. Your next opportunity to be live with the Fun Manifesto is on Wednesday with Auntie J. And we'll see Dinna next Sunday, and I'll be singing on Saturday. And please share this video with people. Invite people into our community. It's your community. So welcome. All right, Dinna Machina, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.
See you next week.